Good morning, USA, and welcome to another episode of the Bernie or Bust Show. Unshaved, unbathed, unedited, and mostly unscripted. Have a slurp, and let's get started. You'll see I'm focusing on Hillary Clinton again, and there's a reason. Hillary Clinton and her machine are still having a powerful effect on what's going on with Elizabeth Warren and other new Democrats. We'll talk about that in a minute. But we have to understand this isn't happening only in California, it's happening all over the place. And when you see weird things happening, when you see people endorsing people or failing to endorse people, as we mentioned with AOC and the squad yesterday, the best place to point your finger is where the power has been and hopefully won't be in the future, but where it may be in the future if we don't figure this out. First thing to talk about is the DLC, and because that's relevant to the Clinton machine. The Democratic Leadership Council was a nonprofit founded in 1985, and it was a think tank. It was arguing that the United States Democratic Party should shift away from the leftward turn it took in the late 60s, 70s, and 80s. One of its main purposes was to win back white middle-class voters with ideas that addressed their concerns. That's why Joe Biden was Barack Obama's running mate. The whole point was to win back white middle-class voters, vote blue no matter who voters, the kinds of liberals I talked about in this article. What sort of liberal are you? Proud white middle class suburban liberal, that's what I'm talking about. And so if you're that sort of liberal, then the DLC was designed to court your favor. More successful, more competent, more affluent, whatever words you like to use, more opportunistic. And so when we're trying to understand Third Way and Center for American Progress, we understand Neera Tanden and John Cowan and David Brock and David Kives of the talent agency, CAA, other people, we're trying to figure out how this white middle class influence has pretty much poisoned everything that's going on. And in an article I wrote recently, I compared that to poison sumac. It's a kind of vine that doesn't have the ability to grow up tall and straight on its own. It finds shrubs and trees and other healthy plants and climbs up on them and then blocks out their light from the sun. That's what the DLC, the DNC, Third Way, Center for American Progress, all are doing. They're like opportunistic, poisonous plants. And so we need to put on our long sleeve shirts and gloves, wade in and start tackling this problem. In this article, it says, within the DLC, populism was not merely out of favor, it was militantly opposed. And the reason for that is populism is kind of grubby, and it is kind of lower middle class and lower class. And so these competent middle class suburbanites can't handle populism. This article is Truth Out from 2016. Hillary Clinton's Ghosts, a legacy of pushing the Democratic Party to the right so that the suburban middle class white voters can accept it. A discussion about how the Democrats could be compromised by their relationship with the financial institutions that fund their campaigns was unthinkable in past presidential debates. Such a discussion falls way outside the narrow parameters of debate that have dominated political discourse in the mainstream media for decades. But as at the Democratic debate in Iowa this November, back in 2016, this issue was front and center. Hillary Clinton was forced to defend her financial relationship with Wall Street numerous times on network television. Clinton's response to populist attacks on her Wall Street connections has largely been, pay attention here, pay attention, Elizabeth Warren fans, has largely been to adopt similar language and policy positions as her primary opponent, Bernie Sanders. Ha! That's just what's going on now. In many ways, she is trying to minimize the differences between her and Sanders rather than emphasize them. That's what Hillary was doing. That's what Elizabeth is now doing. So you look at how the DLC got started, and you see how it morphed into the Third Way and to the Center for American Progress with the same goals that it had then, and you see what's going on. Heads up, here's an article, democraticunderground.com. Cui bono is this author, and cui bono in Latin means who benefits. So it basically means follow the money trail. Cui bono is a clever moniker. I was caught by that right away. This is what cui bono says. They are attempting to stop the people's movement to take big money out of politics so that our leaders are not beholden to corporations such as Goldman Sachs. They are in the way of the people's movement for equality for all, for economic fairness, justice, and for the right to have a decent life in this country. They are in the way of single-payer health care because they are backing a candidate who is beholden to the health industry. And so again, we're going back in time to Hillary, and then we're seeing the eerie similarities between what was happening in 2016 and what's still happening now. Cui bono gives a little brief about the DLC, and again you see who the past chairs were: former President Bill Clinton, Richard Gephardt, Senator Joseph Lieberman, and Harold Ford, and you see where we're going. And then this cui bono pointed me to Hillary Clinton's ghosts, and then I followed the trail from there. But if you're really interested in why Third Way President John Cowan considers Bernie Sanders to be an existential threat to the Democratic Party, then this is required reading. You should definitely figure this out. Everything becomes clearer. I hate to say I told you so, but the predictions I made in this article are coming true. And this is an article I wrote, so I'll link to this down below. The Clinton machine has clearly swung its support over from Biden to Warren, and Warren absolutely is aware of this, as evidenced by her recent meetings with Hillary Clinton and other clues being sleuthed by alternative leftist commentators such as Jimmy Dore, Tim Black, and Crystal Ball. I want to make it clear that we're back to the present now. We're not in 2016. This is happening now. She met with Hillary recently. The type of liberals, so-called centrists and moderates, who actively tout capitalism. I've been arguing with some of these from the United Kingdom, and they're aware of this swing, and somehow they've gotten the word. The playbook is out and about again, and they're swinging their support behind Elizabeth Warren, which is unlikely because she's a little grubbier than the kinds of candidates they would normally want to support. That's an explanation. You say, well, isn't Elizabeth Warren ideologically aligned with Bernie Sanders? Why would these competent, white, elitist, middle-class liberals want Elizabeth Warren? Doesn't she wag her fingers at the big banks? But Elizabeth has been talking to them. She's been actively making overtures to them to let them know that she's not going to shake them up. That thanks to Crystal Ball for that sleuthing. If you follow Crystal Ball on The Hill, it's a show you can follow on YouTube like this one. You'll see that Crystal has been figuring out this connection. She's the one who's noticing how Elizabeth is communicating with the DNC powers. I actually unearthed that one with the talent agency people, and but Crystal also is noticing how she's working with other powerful people in this third way world and reassuring them, making lots of efforts to reassure them that she's not really going to shake up the system. She's not really going to come at them in an adversarial way. What Elizabeth hopes to do is work directly with the capitalists and talk them into being a little less bully-ish. So I'll link to this article. This is an older, well, this is not old, it's August of this year, but I've been talking about it before. And want to remind you that the progressives who support Warren are like these United Kingdom progressives, air quotes. They're not progressive. They're third way think tank kind of people. And what we see in the data, if you look at this article, it's well researched, and the polling data is well respected. And what you see in this article is that the people who are supporting Elizabeth are not grubby populists. They're these third way people. They're these white liberal people that have traditionally, that would have voted and did vote probably for Hillary Clinton in the last election. So I'll link to that one again. Megan Day, I'll show you her. This is what she looks like. That's Megan Day for Jacobin. I've been talking about this article for a few days and sharing it all over the place. Megan Day says, Warren was courting mega donors last year and says she'll do it again if she wins the primary. But working people deserve leaders willing to make enemies in high places for life. If you want someone who will make enemies in high places for life, don't look at this woman and don't look at this woman. It isn't because they're women. Good grief, I'm tired of that. Look at Tulsi if you want a woman. Look at Jill Stein, but don't look at Elizabeth Warren if you want somebody who's going to do more than wag her finger at big bankers. So Megan makes the case that a lot of the war chest for Elizabeth Warren's presidential campaign came from her Senate campaign. When she announced her presidential campaign, she promised to eschew the traditional top dollar donor circuit. But as Shane Goldmacher points out, last winter and spring, she transferred $10.4 million in leftover funds from her 2018 Senate campaign to underwrite her 2020 run, a portion of which was raised from the same donor class she is now running against. So Elizabeth is trying to have it both ways. And as we keep saying, if you're really a progressive, you don't take money from people that you don't intend to favor and answer to. If they've given you money, they're going to expect something from it. And so we look at this both sides of the coin here, and we say you got to stop this. This is what Megan has to say in an article, or about her article on The Hill.
But let's not forget why FDR was put in the hot seat and decided to pursue the New Deal. It's because the capitalist class feared a working class revolution. There was so...
That's a big point. And when you go back and read about the DLC, you'll see that point about FDR. FDR wasn't necessarily motivated the way Bernie Sanders is. He was trying to appease the capitalists who were afraid they were going to get their heads cut off. There were people, I mean, literally, they were thinking French Revolution. They were thinking, oh my goodness, the people are going to rise up. The labor unions were stronger then than they are now. They were afraid of the pitchforks. And when you look at the way the wealthy few have lorded it over the many in the labor class, there was reason for them to be nervous. I think there are increasingly reasons for them to be nervous now.
much working class activity. There were so many strikes, unions were peaking, that there and the Great Depression in particular had left so many people so disenchanted with the establishment that there was actually some great concern that the people were going to rise up, and if they didn't do something like the New Deal, then something worse was going to happen for the capitalist class. So I don't entirely agree with the entire theory of change that you're setting forth. The idea that change happens at the top when people who have power form coalitions with each other.
That's what Elizabeth Warren thinks, that change happens from the top. That you talk to the movers and the shakers and you get them to agree to give up their power, or a little bit of their power, incrementally. Give up just enough so that the pitchforks don't get you. That's what Elizabeth Warren is. She's trying to have them give up just enough power, pay just enough lip service, so that they don't get their heads cut off in a revolution.
That's certainly a part of it, but what matters the most is what they're responding to on the ground. And I think that what's interesting about Bernie Sanders is that he actually sees his role as galvanizing ordinary people on the ground to be a part of what he calls a political revolution, to actually, amass their forces and start pushing for change outside the established halls of power. He seems to want that, and he's hoping that he can organize the forces that can create a ruckus, basically, once he's president, so that, that ruckus can help him compel others in the halls of power to make the changes that he wants to make.
And Megan, Ryan Grimm at the Intercept was noting that Elizabeth Warren seems to have recently adopted that same language of a sort of grassroots movement to pressure people in D.C. What do you make of that?
I've noticed that she's been adopting that language, and I'm of two minds about it. On the one hand, I'm happy to see that kind of language entering the mainstream, because I'm not sure that we can so easily come back from it, right? Like, once we start to make this a norm for what you sound like, if you want to claim the mantle of progressive, then it's kind of hard to roll that back.
Claim the mantle. Okay, let me remind you what I just said. She is trying to minimize the differences between her and Sanders. Hillary was, and Elizabeth is trying to do the same thing. It's trying to adopt similar language and policy positions as her primary opponent, Bernie Sanders. The DLC called themselves progressive, which is crazy. It's duplicitous and sneaky. That's what it is.
Which is great. On the other hand, I do think that it contradicts many of the ways that she's actually campaigning. She's been, networking with Democratic Party insiders and assuring them behind the scenes that they have nothing to fear. She doesn't want to stage a hostile takeover of the party. She doesn't, she's not an outsider. She's an insider. She's sort of their frenemy. She wants to whip people into shape, but she's like a pal. Bernie Sanders is characteristically cantankerous. I don't think that he wants anyone who is not really his friend to think that he's their friend. I think that he actually enjoys being reviled by people who he personally reviles. So he doesn't actually play that game, and he holds the Democratic Party establishment at an arm's length. And importantly, for the purposes of the article that I just wrote, he also holds the rich liberal donor network at an arm's length. And he basically says, I don't want your money, because if I were to take...
Does Elizabeth Warren hold those same people at arm's length? Not so much.
Take your money, that would be a tacit promise to you that I will be looking out for your interests in decisive moments. And the fact of the matter is that I'm only going to be looking out for the interests of the vast majority of working people in this country.
He says out and out that he is an existential threat to the Democratic establishment. Right. I don't think he's shy about that, and it's a very distinct approach from the way Elizabeth Warren has gone about running her campaign and governing while she's been in the Senate. Megan, so great to have you today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us, Megan.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Megan, I'm going to follow Megan Day. Keep your eye on what she's doing. Now, what's Bernie doing? Bernie, I think, is figuring out New Hampshire. Not just New Hampshire, but Massachusetts, where Elizabeth is. I think what they're figuring out is it's not going to be a cakewalk in New Hampshire this time. Bernie won decisively last time in New Hampshire, but what we've got to figure out is that there are more choices now. So Bernie has shaken up the leadership in New Hampshire in the state machinery and replaced Joe Cayazzo with Shannon Jackson, a member of the inner circle. And other things are going on there on the ground. He's got more people mobilized in his million plus army to make sure that they can. I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to make sure that the people in his area, and it's also Elizabeth Warren's area, understand this difference. And in some ways, it seems like Bernie has kind of given up on the DLC, DNC, Third Way, Center for American Progress, white middle-class liberal voters. He's trying to get on the ground and get the disenfranchised Trump voters and other populist sorts of voters. Those are the sorts of voters, if you remember in New Hampshire last time, were trying to decide whether they liked Bernie better or Trump better, which is kind of crazy for the white middle class liberals. They don't understand why you could choose between those two. But it's about populism. It's about economic disparity. It's about economic desperation, if you will. And so he's trying to make that distinction again, I think, in New Hampshire. And so what you'll see, here's a prediction, in New Hampshire is you're going to see a big disparity between the voters and their economic status between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. You're going to see the rich people going one way and the poor people and the intellectuals and young people going the other way. So that's what I'd say is going to happen in New Hampshire. That's been a big thrust for me in the Bernie or Bust show, is to show you this disparity between the haves and the have-nots and how they're likely to go. The haves who went with Hillary last time seem to be, especially in the United Kingdom, where they're following our politics very carefully, they seem to have swung their support behind Elizabeth very strongly, and they're trying to urge the Yanks to do the same thing. And to me, that's a harbinger of doom. I'd say that they're ahead of us. The Democrats, the liberals, let's say, the liberals in the United Kingdom are ahead of us in terms of figuring out what's going on in this country and how the party players ought to align themselves. So pay attention and don't swing that direction. If you're a white middle class liberal and you give a shit about humanity, don't vote for Joe Biden. Don't vote for Kamala Harris. Don't vote for Pete Buttigieg. Don't vote for Beto O'Rourke. Figure this out. And most of all, don't vote for Elizabeth Warren. Figure out what's going on and do the right thing. I'm sure you'll hear me say that again. For now, have a great day. Get your week started off. Have some more coffee and keep on burning.